So this is the last session. So we've decided to do something a little bit different because we were going to do a rather traditional panel for you, the final panel. But we're actually going to start with a very important conversation, provocation, question that Hilary was going to ask to Davor Vidas. Davor Vidas, who many of you know already, is the research professor of international law and director law of the Sea program at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, Norway. And he's the chair of the Committee of International Law and Sea Level Rise at the International Law Association, and a member of the Anthropocene Working Group in the International Commission on Stratigraphy. Sorry. I knew I'd make some mistake somewhere along. So the two of them are going to start with a conversation and a question, and they're going to debate this for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes maximum. And then we're going to go into our respective board and panel, and I will introduce the rest of the participants then. So I really thank you for taking on the lead here, Hilary and Davor. Welcome to the hot seat.
So I realize this constitutes a second chance at this, and I've spent the morning changing language games into law so that we can have a new kind of rigor. Second chances are very rare in law and geochemistry, so I thank you very much. But biological history has been written by these regular punctuations where a kind of coevolutionary stasis has even come into... Can't you understand me? No. Okay. I won't start again, though. So this is what I am proposing is an addend error. It's nothing like a provocation. I don't want to jostle any of the fragile structure we have supporting so many lifetimes. I rather want to be like that mutation that responds to catastrophe. Life gets fresh traction in slippery conditions by adding an addend error to its scripts that allows it to get traction. This is a proposal that I am rushing through for the infrastructure, a package of solutions which revolve around a new kind of infrastructure finance as a set of solutions for the loss of territory or statehood to rising seas. To begin, okay, if we imagine, let's zoom into very rapidly and crudely into a situation like Bangladesh. It has a sort of animosities with India regarding the flow of water, so it has a shortage of fresh water, a chronic shortage of fresh water. At the same time, it has a preponderance of salt water from the rising sea, so it's caught in this crazy paradigm. And if we approach this from a legal antagonistic standpoint, we get something like the 1996 treaty, which is problematic and prey to political, and while it's working at a certain point, it doesn't address the rising seas. The moment we have the capacity to wreak infrastructure freely, a whole zone of solution sets open up. And so let's again now look at another problem. In other words, we have the technology to desalinate water, to take water from an inland sandbank where it's filtered of its biological material, to desalinate this, to pump this up to the Himalayas, some valley that it can be pumped in, and therefore to create over the course of 25 years a new reservoir and aquifers of fresh water that can be tapped. Now, let me just for a moment talk about the social development, the sustainable development goals, and indeed human rights. These are both these finest pieces of scripting that humanity has produced, and yet they share this quality in that they name an endpoint, a desirable endpoint, social development goals, the actual exercise of human rights, rather than just the declaration by a bunch of white guys that we all have these things, but the impossibility for 99.99% of us to actually exercise these things. So the question is that these all lack a procession to the desired endpoint. So what I say is that there's actually a huge amount of matter, of actual conditions, changing, human, wreaking, technological structures like hospitals and schools and things that would support the exercise of rights or give us the sustainable development goals achieved. So I'm going to now leap right into a new idea for how to finance infrastructure. Is okay so far? Yeah? Okay. Am I talking too fast? No. So infrastructure right now is universally funded either by China, which is wreaking enormous amounts of infrastructure with, let's say, a low amount of design quality in there, although rising, and it's doing this at risk of its financial models. It's just accumulating a lot of debt for the geostrategic objectives somehow can justify this amount of infrastructure. And the old nation-state model of investing in infrastructure and reaping the reward for the economic growth that infrastructure supports, that you can reap the reward from the very top in taxation. Yeah, so this is epitaxy, from the very profit and prosperity that your investment in infrastructure has supported, you take your return. So this is a proposal that that in fact infrastructure has a very particular quality of its durability on the one hand, and its ability to support that development, and that to monetize that quality so that we could actually make a financial product that includes this ingredient of durability. In other words, that we could create a bubble of demand for infrastructure, because it is the ingredient of a very desirable financial product. And in this way, to, as it were, flip the script entirely from this very fragile investment vehicle, where if you want to build infrastructure in the third world, you have to worry about exchange rates, you have to worry that the people can't actually afford to pay for this. So rather, what I'm proposing is that we say, infrastructure, we create a new kind of collateral that contains tetherage, as it were, ownership in a digital ledger of a piece of real estate in this ledger that is tethered forever to this piece of infrastructure. So, for example, yes. Now, I think at this point I should shut up, and you know, I'm urgent, as it were, to communicate my error to you scriptors, and it's towards a win-win solution and an addend rather than a contested, you know, for example, a class action lawsuit against Exxon Mobil, which is thoroughly outside my remit. So I'm just about win-win, like Exxon Mobil likes this type of okay. Interrogate. Please, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I hope you do listen, you do hear me. I'm not used to speak in church, but I will try. And I would first say that, well, but Francesca can convince me in that. But first, I find your approach, I would say, very interesting, but a bit simplistic. And this is what we share, law of the sea or international lawyers, and the infrastructure emphasis. Both infrastructure and law are conceived as being in situ. We have been looking from the legal perspective at our regulation under the implicit assumption of enduring stability. And this is also what we have been dealing here, but also in other international law fora. What we are used to is a stability in terms of sea level rise, for instance. Sea level has been stable for the last 6,000 to 7,000 years. This is the longest period of stability our species has witnessed, not only us, as in the more modern time. And this relates to infrastructure, but it relates to law as well. What we are not used to is that this parameter, which is implicit in all our approaches, is being changed. We are used to political change, but not earth system change. This is what we are witnessing now. We are in the moment, we are witnessing, all of us are witnessing a crucial moment of change. We don't know how big this change will be, but we do know that a good part of it is already inbuilt due to atmosphere, ocean, ice interaction. This is what we have been discussing here. We had the introduction on the first day. And I think that, because for me, the key word in your talk, and also the other day, was emphasis on infrastructure. and also financial flows to it. I think here one has to understand the change of the moment. Not only stability, but the change, dynamics.
In fact, I say the differences between slipperiness and traction, and that our law and in fact our legal and our political and our cultural scripts are all basically giving us traction, like DNA gives a creature traction on a set of respondable conditions. There's a terrain in which it can respond, and if there's too much water or no water, it literally has no response in its genetical script. And you script writers are, as it were, I think of you as thinking about how to script traction on this new condition. So this was the metaphor I was using is punctuated equilibrium, where it is in fact that error that arrives, that suddenly the thing has a flipper and it gets rudimentary traction on the new conditions, and from that a new life begins again in effect. So I'm looking at you as scriptors of traction on changing conditions.
I see, I get it, very, very good. I think that it is a matter of definition and how you approach definition. What, from our perspective, what the law of the sea is really. And then the first definition on which we are used to is the law of the sea, is a system of rules that regulates relations between subjects of international law in relation to uses of the sea or approach to the sea environment. That is one ordinary definition which we would learn from dictionaries or from manuals of the law of the sea. But another more frank definition is, it is the way to express interests couched in principles and rules. Now again, the change of the more recent time is that a third definition could be the one we have to be looking at. And that is that law of the sea, or international law in general, is a system of rules that was conceived on the background of the Holocene conditions taken for granted forever, implicitly. So there are many elements of how you can look at the definition, but I think the essence of our problem is here, of problem of our group, but also some other international lawyers, many of them.
Mm-hmm. It's almost a case where the perpetrator of the crime is civilization itself as well as the victim. If you take, of course we know that it is in fact the West and our ancestry, but I find it very hard to carry guilt on for these things which have also supported hospitals, and I call this the accumulation. It is our inheritance, and I am aware that its ownership in fact is absolutely an area of contestation, but nonetheless this is what we have to work with and build upon. And I say that in fact if you leave the language game of that, and that reparations would take the form we spoke, I said you lose your statehood, you lose your land, your territory to this carbon-induced rise in sea levels. What is your reparation could be possible for such a loss, such an ontologically intense destabilization? And we started talking about the idea of a job, and that the average Londoner is basically hand to mouth from a job and a place to be. And that while that is a true degradation from statehood and the ownership of a place in the world as a home, it is somehow potentially a more productive reparation than a lump of cash is a new place, and to conquer some expulsed piece of land from the bedrock nothingness. For example, I say the UN Protectorate of Western Sahara is a perfect example of a wasteland, but nonetheless it is rich in sun, and it has mountains a few thousand miles away, and we could desalinate. We know how to build and we know that migrant flows are coming through here and destabilizing the politics and the very meaning of what is the difference between an economic and ecological and human rights migrant, and that to create a huge new absorbency for labor, rather than the paradigm of the wasted generation, rather than shitty houses in America that pop this bubble, or crypto code, that rather it's get that infrastructure. The more durable, the better, because it's a better ingredient for our financial product. There are models of this, and literally we could stick this model, we could re-implant it and thus create a huge hunger for human labor. And from that, we could have, I know it's a very modernist notion, but the fact is we've wreaked modernity on the world, and sociologically we know a job, a place, you pay. And yes, of course, we must have places to take those who are not willing to enter this game. We have to, of course, create multiplicity of possibilities, but as a fundamental new hunger for human labor in the world.
I think that you had two essential theses here. The first was really the causal link. Who is guilty?
Yeah.
And how can we connect this to responsibility? Well, causal link is almost impossible to prove.
Or
the causal
so
link of the consequence, or very, very easy, but very easy in general, but impossible in specifics.
Yeah.
Therefore, I do not think that in legal terms, tracing responsibility, legal responsibility, not political, will be possible.
I agree.
I think that is all. So then the next question which you had is what to do. And then you had many examples. You had labor, financial instruments in Sahara, was it? Also, what to do? What to do? Mitigation, they say. Mitigation, isn't it? But mitigation, they understand there are two notions which are a cliché: mitigation and adaptation. And under mitigation, they very often understand, okay, let's do something to protect the globe from CO2 accumulation. Well, sorry, you can't do all of that. Some of that is already inbuilt in the reaction in between atmosphere and ocean.
But the difference between what's inbuilt and what could be.
And what could be, exactly.
That's the point,
so,
isn't it?
Mitigation remains a valid instrument in that sense.
Yeah.
But that is there is also one other view on what mitigation is. Because here we talk about political measures to prevent or stop our impact on change of natural conditions, of Earth system conditions. That is one aspect. The other aspect of mitigation, which I think we also have to look at, is political measures which are oriented on facilitating avoidance of future conflicts. This is what we've been conceiving and working on here.
Gorgeous. That's
what really, how could you use a law and legal measures to foresee the change in circumstances, all in order not to really preserve legal formulas as they are, or legal stability of boundaries per se, but with aim. And the aim is, let us try to avoid conflicts in future now that they are in their nucleus, that they don't exist really yet. Because they will emerge. And then if we have a good legal structure conceived in advance, we might be able to influence future development. We might. And this might is underlined with 3 red colors. But this is all what we, as international lawyers, at this moment can do. And we need this conscience. We need to be conscious of that our action matters, that what we publish is not for our CVs and our bibliographies. They will be gone with sea level rise anyhow, or whatever change, that we have a goal and aim. And I believe that we have sensed this in those 2 days and of course David, who will be speaking later, he can elaborate, but I think that this general idea is here. Because look, we have this, if I can be bold enough to say, our Bible is Law of the Sea Convention. We consider this as a constitution of the oceans. It is a framework for, it says in its preamble, framework for all uses. It regulates all uses of the sea and all activities. But we have a very recent book which I showed at the beginning, A Farewell to Ice, written, but they say, the best expert on sea ice in the world. It is Peter Wathams. a farewell to ice changes many parameters, because we have approached law of the sea on an equation which has two parameters, land and sea. But there is a third one, a hidden, a secret, and that's ice. Ice changes those parameters, and what we are having now is a reaction of ice through the atmosphere and oceans. You see?
Yeah.
So here we return to the infrastructural issues,
Yeah.
to the stability issue, to dynamic issues, causal link.
Yeah. So I would say that there's actually even a fourth one that you touched on, which is I say that there's adaptation and there's mitigation,
yes,
and there's
definitely,
also elaboration, which is literally that you elaborate a new response. And so I say the difference when we talk about these rather abstract terms, such as how the Paris Accords are written, they're naming a future situation, but the point is that there's a huge amount of material conditions that need to be addressed. And right now we can see how rapidly the fragilities of this come, because between Obama and the Trump regime, we have something that goes from, yes, we are contributing to the creation of these solar fields in India, Europe, et cetera, to it being called wealth transfer. Because there's this point is that you are going to have a bloody big enemy to any reparations. Yeah. So especially as the regime stands now. So I say that rather the elaboration way is to say that we need to unleash our ability to wreak structure on the world. And that in fact, if we just go through that, the main missing ingredient is a whole amount of human error, a whole amount of design. You cannot just plop the amount of infrastructure we need to keep it within catastrophe. You may not just drop that without a huge amount of human error. So I say far beyond adaptation, mitigation, if we want to elaborate a response to this and stop it, it's a race. We're burning so much, right? This geologist said that the pure consumption numbers are impossible. It is a question of what do we elaborate? What form do we create? What flipper do we make with the burning of that fuel as a metabolic spherical entity? And so I propose that something like reparations could be very comfortably couched if you have a new safe asset, which literally within it has an ingredient that demands the production of durable social development, error-rich and specific infrastructure in it. Thus, when a nation state buys one of these safe assets or unwinds QE by instead purchasing a whole bunch of social, SDG infra, proof of work, collateral, they are having a nested foreign direct investment within this instrument, within this safe asset. And I say there is the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, after the crisis, they have radically changed their discussion of, they are calling, it has been proven that we want the largest issuer of safe assets. And it is clear that we need a new safe asset class in the world. So in the financial world, in the ecological reality and geochemistry, it's calling for the creation of a new safe asset class that is from the largest issuer, and to have an infra issuer. The ocean is the infrastructure up which life has climbed to the light. And for it to be literally the entity that issues this safe asset, the AIIB, the World Bank, the IMF, these are the institutions that could be an infranational safe asset issuer with a nested foreign direct investment that accomplishes the goal without these contested territories like reparations or lawsuits, but rather nested in demand for a financial product. That is the viral ingredient that humans have come upon, to wreak change quickly these days.
I believe that I would agree, but with reparations, but not on the basis of causal link towards responsibility, but on the basis of the need.
Exactly.
Of the need.
Yes.
Of those who are in need.
Yes, and the vehicle to do that can be biochemically complex in its script. It doesn't need to be so frontal and prey to accusations of wealth transfer. It can literally be in something that is a demanded product, that the wealth wants to flow into this vehicle, and the thing, rather than it jerking the US to, anyway, that's enough.
But,
I want to go forward. Thank you. Second chances. Thank you.